Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're going to dive into a really compelling and maybe even controversial idea. It comes from Johann Hari's best-selling book, Lost Connections, and it all starts with a huge question about depression.
And that question is, what if the story we've all been told about depression is wrong? Now, this isn't just some abstract thought experiment. For the author, Johann Hari, this was personal. It was the beginning of a huge journey to solve a mystery that started with his own deep, relentless sadness. For this explainer, we're really going to hone in on the book's introductory chapters. Why? Because they take aim at the prevailing narrative, the one story most of us have heard about what depression is, and maybe more importantly, how we're supposed to treat it.
And Hari's own story starts right here. He was just 18 when he took his first antidepressant. And as he puts it, it felt like a chemical kiss, a moment of pure, blissful relief that promised an end to a kind of pain he'd known pretty much his whole life.
And this is the story his doctor gave him. It's probably the same one you've heard 1,000 times. It's so simple, right? Your depression isn't your fault. It's a disease. It's a glitch in your brain, this thing called a chemical imbalance, low serotonin. And these pills, they restore that balance. They fix the glitch. Simple as that. It's just biology.
But here's the thing. Over the next 13 years, a strange pattern started to emerge. That initial relief, that chemical kiss, it never really lasted. He'd feel a bit better for a while, but then the deep unhappiness would just come rushing back every single time, even as his doctors kept upping the dose.
And this led him to a question that he just couldn't shake. A really crucial question. If he was doing everything right, taking the pills that were supposed to fix the chemical problem in his brain, then how could he still be depressed? Why wasn't he getting better?
So to understand what was going on, we actually have to go back in time. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because it turns out a massive clue to this whole puzzle was uncovered during this kind of bizarre, almost funny experiment more than 200 years ago.
So, let's set the scene. Picture it. We're in Bath, England. The year is 1799, and the whole city is buzzing about this miraculous new invention that's supposedly curing people left and right of these horrible chronic pains.
So you've got this thing called the Perkins tractor. It's this expensive, patented metal rod, and the inventor claims it literally draws sickness out of the body. But a local doctor, a guy named John Hari, he was super skeptical. He thought it was total nonsense. So he decided to test it by creating his own version, a fake tractor made from a plain old piece of wood, but disguised to look exactly like the magic one.
And what happened next was just wild. The results were absolutely astonishing. 4 out of the 5 patients who were treated with the fake wooden wand reported feeling immediate relief. We're talking about a man with a super painful knee who suddenly starts walking around freely. Another guy who couldn't lift his arm for years could suddenly raise it. The fake wand. It worked just as well as the supposedly real one.
You can just imagine the scene. The doctor who was helping Haygarth said they were almost afraid to even look at each other. I mean, they had set out to expose a scam, right? But instead, they accidentally stumbled onto something way, way more powerful. They discovered that the story you tell someone, the ritual, the hope, it can be just as healing as the actual treatment. This was one of the very first real demonstrations of what we now know as the placebo effect.
Okay, so let's jump forward 200 years. We're back in the modern era, and that exact same idea is about to be put to the test, but this time with antidepressants. And it's done by a Harvard-based researcher, Professor Irving Kirsch. Now, what's so fascinating is that when he started this whole thing, Kirsch was a total believer in the chemical antidepressant story.
He wanted to figure something out. How much of an antidepressant's power is actually the chemical and how much is something else? So, kind of like Dr. Haygarth and his fake wand, Kirsch and his team set out to isolate the true active ingredient. They asked a really simple but profound question. When a person takes an antidepressant and feels better, what part of that feeling is from the drug's chemicals and what part is, everything else?
And the way they did this was, honestly, pretty brilliant. They analyzed studies that used 3 different groups of patients. So you have one group that gets nothing. This lets you measure how many people would have just gotten better on their own over time. Then you have another group that gets a placebo, a sugar pill.
This measures the power of hope and belief. And finally, you have the group that gets the actual antidepressant. So you subtract the natural recovery, then you subtract the placebo effect, and whatever's left, well, that has to be the true chemical effect of the drug itself.
So, they gathered up all the publicly available studies and crunched the numbers. And the results? Well, according to Kirsch himself, they were nothing short of shocking. What they found was that the actual chemical ingredients of the drug accounted for only about 25% of why people felt better. A whopping 50%, half of the entire effect, was the placebo effect. It was the story. And the other 25%, that was just people getting better on their own, which happens.
And this right here is where you see these two competing stories just smash into each other. You've got the simple story we're all told. Depression is a chemical imbalance, a broken brain, and these drugs are the targeted fix. But then, Kirsch's data suggests something else entirely. It suggests the chemical part is only a small piece of a much bigger puzzle, and that our belief in the cure, the placebo effect, is actually doing most of the heavy lifting.
Now, let's be super clear about something. The author argues that this does not mean antidepressants are useless, and it definitely doesn't mean the relief people feel isn't real. It is absolutely real. The point is, why are they working? The relief might be coming from a totally different place than we've been told.
For Johann Hari, this was a bombshell. It just completely shattered that simple story he'd built his recovery on for over a decade. So if depression isn't just a broken brain, then what is it? Finding this out solved one mystery, but it opened up a much bigger, much more profound one.
And that's the question that really drives the rest of his journey. Could something other than bad brain chemistry have been causing depression and anxiety? If so, what could it be? If the main cause of all this pain isn't a simple malfunction in our heads, what if it's coming from the world around us? What if depression isn't a disease at all, but a signal, a symptom of a life that's gone wrong, trying to tell us that something is deeply, deeply off about the way we're living?